The prairie town of Red Hollow gathered under a hot, merciless sun as the auction bell rang. Dust drifted in the air like ash while men leaned against hitching posts, waiting to see who would be sold next. Then the sheriff's deputies brought her out. A young woman, thin, pale, trembling. She looked as though she had barely recovered from childbirth. Her dress was wrinkled, the color drained from her cheeks, yet her eyes were sharp with fear and defiance. The baby she delivered days ago had been taken from her by the men who owned her contract, leaving her broken in spirit but still holding on to something quiet inside. Her name, whispered among the crowd, was Mara. The auctioneer shouted her age, her skills, her usefulness, but even the rough men in the square shifted uncomfortably. No one wanted to buy a woman who looked like she might collapse. The cruelty of it lingered like smoke. At the back of the crowd stood a rancher named Cole Branner. A quiet man, tall and sun-worn. He'd come to town for tools and mail, not for this. But when Mara lifted her head, he saw something he recognized: exhaustion, fear, and a desperate determination to survive. The bidding began. No one raised a hand. Not until Cole stepped forward. $1, he said, steady, firm, but not triumphant. The crowd murmured. The auctioneer sighed. No one countered. The gavel fell, and the deal was done. Mara hung her head, bracing herself for another cage, another man to obey. But when Cole approached her, he didn't grab her or bark orders. He only said, "You won't be hurt again. Not by me." She didn't answer. She wasn't sure she believed him. But for the first time in days, she didn't feel like she was drowning. Cole walked Mara away from the auction yard, careful not to touch her without permission. She moved slowly, her breath thin, her body still weak. He could see she was trying not to collapse. "Let me help you," he said. She hesitated, then gave a small nod. He lifted her gently onto his wagon, laying a blanket beneath her so she wouldn't sit directly on the rough boards. His horse snorted and clopped forward, pulling them away from the prying stares of Red Hollow. Mara kept her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she finally spoke. "You don't have to pretend kindness. You bought me." "I bought your freedom," Cole replied. "Not you." She blinked at him, unsure if she'd heard correctly. He explained, with careful words, that he intended to release her from the contract the moment she was well enough to choose her own path. But he wouldn't abandon her in her condition, not out here, where the land itself could kill someone too fragile to stand. Mara listened but said nothing. She had been promised safety before. Promises meant nothing. When the wagon reached Cole's ranch, he helped her inside the house. It was simple but warm, clean quilts, a sturdy table, sunlight through cotton curtains. A place built by a man who lived alone yet lived with care. "You can rest in here," he said, opening the door to a small bedroom. No locks, no expectations. Mara touched the bedpost, feeling its solid weight beneath her fingers. Her throat tightened. She hadn't slept in a real bed in months. "Why?" she whispered. "Because no one deserves what they did to you," Cole said. For the first time, she believed he might be telling the truth. "If you are still with me, friend, I hope you hit the subscribe button, so you do not miss what happens next. Grab a cup of tea or coffee. Settle. And tell me in the comments what time it is for you right now. And where you're listening from." Mara slept for nearly a full day. When she woke, she found a tray beside her, warm broth, soft bread, a tin cup of water. No one waited to force her to eat. No one hovered. Cole had simply left it, trusting her to come back to herself at her own pace. She stepped slowly into the main room. Cole was at the table repairing a bridle, working with quiet focus. "You're awake," he said. "Good." She nodded, unsure how to respond. He told her she could stay as long as she needed, weeks, months, however long it took to recover. He didn't want repayment. He didn't want ownership, only for her to be safe. Still, she felt unsettled. Safety was a foreign thing. Later, as she stepped outside to breathe fresh air, she noticed a small wooden grave by the fence. A tiny one, carefully tended. "That was my daughter," Cole said gently when he saw her looking. "She lived 2 days." Mara's breath caught, not from fear but understanding. Loss recognized loss. She told him, in halting words, that her baby had been taken from her at birth. Sold to another family before she even held him. Cole didn't ask questions. He simply said, no mother should carry that alone. Something inside Mara cracked, not painfully, more like a tight knot loosening. She cried quietly, and Cole stepped back to give her space, letting her grief fall onto the earth like rain that had been waiting too long. In that moment, Mara realized he wasn't trying to possess her. He was trying to return what had been stolen, her humanity. Mara's strength returned slowly, but with each passing day she walked farther, breathed easier, and spoke more. She helped with small chores, folding laundry, feeding chickens, gathering herbs. Cole never asked her to do anything, yet she found comfort in having purpose again. One evening, she told him why she had been auctioned. Her husband had died in a saloon fight shortly before her child was born. The men he owed money to had seized her contract as payment. When she became too weak to work after giving birth, they decided she was easier to sell than nurse back to health. Cole listened without interrupting. His jaw was tight, his eyes stormy with quiet anger, but not toward her. You didn't deserve any of that, he said. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe everything he offered, space, safety, time. But part of her still expected him to reveal a darker motive. Then one afternoon, she overheard him speaking to a lawyer in town, arranging to legally free her from all ownership claims. He wasn't just being kind, he was giving her a chance she'd thought impossible. When she confronted him gently about it, Cole shrugged and said, "You deserve your own life. I'm just making sure no one can take it from you again." It was the first moment Mara allowed herself to trust him completely. Mara began taking evening walks across the property. She explored the ridge above the house, the small creek that ran behind the barn, the wind-swept fields where deer sometimes grazed. Everywhere she went, Cole gave her room, not watching over her like a guard but like someone ready to help if she needed it. One night, she found him repairing a lantern by the porch. She sat beside him, letting the quiet settle. "You say this isn't my home," she murmured, "but it feels more like one than any place I've ever known." "It can be," he said softly, "if you want it." She stared at his hands, the same hands that had been gentle from the moment he touched her shoulder at the auction. "I don't know what I want yet," she admitted. "That's allowed." His patience steadied her more than promises ever had. Days later, the lawyer returned with documents freeing her entirely from her contract. Mara held the papers in trembling hands, reading her name, finally her name, written without ownership beside it. "You're free," Cole said. She looked up at him and felt something shift. Freedom wasn't a lonely horizon. It was standing in front of her. But before she could say anything, word reached them. The men who had sold her were coming back, claimed they had made a mistake and wanted compensation. Cole's expression darkened. "You're not going back," he said. "Not while I'm breathing." And for the first time, Mara believed she wasn't alone in this world. The next morning dawned gray and heavy. The storm clouds seemed to sense danger, gathering low over the hills. Cole prepared the horses, checked the fence lines, sharpened tools, not out of fear, but readiness. Mara stayed close to the house, her nerves prickling like cold wind against her skin. She had fought for years to stay alive, but she had never had someone willing to fight for her. "They can't take me," she whispered. "No," Cole said, "they won't." When the riders appeared on the ridge, 3 men in dark coats, their silhouettes sharp against the sky, Mara felt her breath hitch. She recognized them. They were the same men who had sold her without care, without mercy. Cole stepped in front of her, not possessive but protective. One of the men called out, "We want her back. She wasn't supposed to be sold." "She wasn't supposed to be yours in the first place," Cole answered. The men demanded payment if he wanted to keep her. Cole refused, saying no one could claim ownership of a human being. The men grew angrier, but none dared draw a weapon, not with the law on Cole's side now that Mara's freedom papers were signed and witnessed. "If you come near her again," Cole warned, "you'll answer to the sheriff next." The men hesitated, exchanged furious looks, then rode off with threats thrown over their shoulders. Mara trembled, and Cole steadying her gently. "You're safe," he said. "Truly." This time, she believed it without doubt. For days afterward, Mara felt the tension slowly drain from her body, like a long-held breath finally allowed to escape. Something inside her, something tight, guarded, wounded, had begun to loosen the moment Cole had stood between her and the men who once claimed ownership over her fate. Now, she walked the ranch with steps that did not tremble. She moved with a softness she hadn't known in years, a softness that surprised even her. She found herself humming while filling water buckets. She paused to watch the morning sunlight glimmer off the horse trough. She lingered when brushing the mare Cole had given her, running her fingers over the animal's warm coat as if touching a promise she never thought she'd receive. Cole noticed the shift without pointing it out. He simply worked beside her, wordless and steady, letting her come into her own pace. When a fence post cracked in a windstorm, he asked her to help him repair it, not because he needed the help, but because he wanted her to know she belonged here. They worked side by side, the rhythmic clink of hammer on metal blending with the wind. Mara felt a strange warmth bloom in her chest every time their hands brushed or their eyes met fleetingly. It was startling, how natural it felt, as though this quiet partnership had existed long before she ever stepped onto his land. For Mara, the most unexpected moments were the laughter, the small, unguarded pieces of joy she didn't recognize as her own at first. Once, while gathering eggs, a stubborn hen pecked her boot with such determination that she burst out laughing. Cole, watching from the barn doorway, felt his heart trip over itself at the sound. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh freely, without worry shadowing the edges. He didn't say anything about it. He only smiled, one of those rare, gentle smiles he saved for the people he cared about. Mara pretended not to notice, but she did. She noticed everything. She noticed how Cole's presence made her shoulders relax, how his voice smoothed the cracks inside her, how his patience wrapped around her like a warm coat. She noticed the way he made space for her without asking her to fill it, the way he spoke to her as though she were more than her past, more than her scars, more than the horror she had been dragged through before arriving here. But most of all, she noticed the peace. Real peace. Peace she could feel in her bones. And that frightened her more than anything, because peace meant she might want to stay. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the pines and painted the sky in soft strokes of rose and amber, Mara brought Cole a cup of coffee. He was sitting on the porch, boots crossed at the ankles, watching the horizon as though waiting for something only he could see. She hesitated in the doorway before stepping out. "I made too much," she said, though they both knew it wasn't the reason she came. He accepted the cup with a nod. "Thank you." She sat down beside him. Not too close, not far enough to seem distant. The wooden boards beneath them were warm from the day's heat. In the silence, crickets began their nighttime song. A faint breeze carried the scent of pine through the air. They watched the stars appear slowly, shy at first, then bold and bright against the deepening blue. Mara rested her hands in her lap. "I didn't think kindness existed anymore," she said quietly. Her voice carried something vulnerable, something fragile she rarely let anyone see. "It does," Cole replied. "It just gets buried sometimes." She turned toward him, studying his profile in the fading light. There was strength there, not the kind that scared her, but the kind that could shield, protect, and hold steady when the world tilted. "You could have walked away at the auction," she whispered. "I couldn't," he said. No explanation, no dramatics, just truth. A long silence stretched between them, but it was peaceful, like a blanket laid gently across their shoulders. Mara felt the truth settle into her bones with a calm certainty she had never known before. Here, on this porch, on this ranch, with this man, she was not afraid. She had found safety. She had found quiet. And maybe, just maybe, she had found something she never expected to feel again. The soft, hesitant beginning of love. Cole didn't reach for her. He didn't need to. The air between them was full enough, warm enough, hopeful enough. For the first time since the birth, since the blood, since the terror in the auction block, Mara let herself imagine a future. And in that future, she wasn't alone. A soft, cool rain drifted across the valley the next afternoon, turning the world outside Cole's cabin into a wavering sheet of silver. The drops tapped gently on the windows and pattered against the roof, the kind of rain that softened the land rather than punished it. Mara stood in the doorway, wrapped in the quiet, watching the desert dust melt into dark earth. Her hair, still damp from washing, curled slightly at the ends. Her breathing was slow, almost steady. Almost. Cole approached without a word, carrying a wool blanket, warm from hanging near the stove. He draped it over her shoulders with a carefulness that made her eyes sting more than fear ever had. She didn't step away this time. Not even an inch. "Mara," he said softly, but she spoke first. "Cole?" Her voice trembled, not with terror, not with memory, but with the weight of something long held back. "I want to stay." He looked at her fully then, rainlight glinting in his eyes. Not surprised, just making sure he heard everything she wasn't yet saying. "Do you want to stay because you're safe here?" he asked quietly. "Or because this feels like home?" She breathed out slowly. "Both," she whispered, "but mostly because you've given me back something I thought I lost forever, my life. My choices." She swallowed. "And I don't want to live any of it without you." Cole's breath caught, his chest tightening like a rope pulled too fast. He opened his mouth. Mara saw words forming, but she stepped forward, closing the space between them. Not timid. Not afraid. Trusting. She reached for his hand and placed it against her own heartbeat, steady now beneath his palm. Cole's jaw tightened, emotion rising in him like a tide he couldn't hold back. He brought her closer, not claiming, not demanding, just holding. "Then stay," he murmured, voice low and shaking slightly. "As long as you want. As long as life allows." Rain whispered on the rooftops, soft as a blessing. And in that fragile, silver-lit moment, Mara finally felt herself belong. The morning sky lay brushed with pale gold when the lone horse appeared on the horizon. Cole spotted the rider first, pausing mid-swing as he split a log near the barn. Mara, tending to the herb beds along the fence, straightened and shielded her eyes. The rider moved with purpose but not urgency, no raised dust, no twitch of danger in the horse's gait. Cole's shoulders eased. "That's the sheriff," he said, wiping his brow with the back of his arm. Mara's hands stilled on the soil. The sheriff's visits were never casual. He only came when something had changed, either for the better or for the worse. And for Mara, who had lived too long in the shadow of men who believed they owned her, change had always meant survival. When the sheriff reached the gate, he dismounted with a slow, steady movement that sent no alarm rippling through the air. He removed his hat, dusting off the brim as he approached. "Morning, Cole." "Mara." His voice was gentler than usual, as though carried in on the wind. Mara tried to breathe. "Sheriff," she answered carefully. Her fingers, usually so sure when tending plants or chores, trembled slightly. Cole stepped quietly closer, not touching her, but his presence formed a border of safety around her. The sheriff cleared his throat. "I came with news. Important news." Mara's knees almost gave way, but she held firm. The sheriff met her eyes directly, steady, honest. "The men who held your contract, the ones who auctioned you off, they've been arrested." Mara blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. For what?" "Armed robbery," he said, "and 2 counts of assault on federal property. They're being transported east for trial. They'll be in custody a long time. Maybe forever." He paused, letting the meaning settle. "They won't return for you. They won't ask about you. They won't hunt you anymore." Mara felt the world shift beneath her feet, like the earth had suddenly exhaled a breath it had held for years. Something inside her, something cold, hard, and heavy, cracked down the middle. "They're gone," she whispered. The sheriff nodded. "You're free, Mara, truly free." Her lips parted, but no sound came. It was Cole who eased forward, his hand hovering near hers, offering but never forcing. The sheriff replaced his hat and stepped back. "If you need anything, you know where to find me. And Mara," he hesitated, "you deserved better than what they did. I hope you have it now." He mounted, tipped his hat once more, and rode off, leaving silence behind him. A silence so heavy it felt sacred. Mara swallowed, her chest rising and falling quickly as if she had run miles. I don't know what to feel," she admitted. Cole reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When she didn't, he took her hand gently. "You don't have to know yet," he murmured. "Just breathe." She did, and the breath that left her was different, looser, lighter, like something long buried had finally risen. Later that afternoon, Mara found herself drawn toward the ridge overlooking the ranch. A soft wind brushed the long grass, carrying with it the scent of pine and the faint sweetness of the wildflowers she'd planted. She walked with purpose but not haste, each step deliberate, as though she was navigating the fragile space between the past and the life she was learning to live. Cole followed several paces behind, neither intruding nor letting her walk alone. He knew where she was going. At the crest of the ridge, the land grew quiet. A small wooden marker stood nestled among the wind-touched stones, simple, unadorned, but tended with loving care. Cole's daughter rested here, the little girl he had lost long before Mara ever entered his life, before fate had wound their paths together through pain neither of them had chosen. Mara knelt slowly, her skirt brushing the grass. She reached into the small basket she carried and pulled out a single flower, delicate, white, grown by her own hands. She laid it before the marker. Her voice, when it came, was soft but steady. "I lost my child," she whispered, "not long after she was born. She never even had a name." She closed her eyes, letting the breeze cool the tears that slipped free. "For so long, I thought I had nothing left. Nothing to give, nothing worth loving." Cole stood behind her, listening, his hat in his hands. "But you," Mara continued, voice quivering, "you taught me that grief doesn't mean we're empty. It means we once held something precious." She brushed a finger across the wooden marker. "And your daughter, she mattered. She still matters. She's part of you, Cole. And so much of you is what saved me." Cole's breath hitched. He took a small step closer. "I used to come here every day," he said quietly. "Talk to her. Ask her why life took her mother, why it took her. I didn't get answers. Just loneliness." Mara turned her head slightly, just enough to meet his eyes. "Then you came along," he said, "and everything I thought was buried started to shift." She rose slowly, and Cole moved automatically to steady her. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into him, just enough to rest her head against his chest, the soft beat of his heart grounding her. "In some strange way," Mara murmured, "maybe life brought us together because it knew we were both meant to heal." Cole closed his eyes, one hand settling gently on her back. "Maybe life finally gave us back what we'd lost," he said. His voice was rough with emotion but sure. They stood together as the wind whispered through the grass, two people who had been broken in different ways, now learning how to mend. The ridge was no longer a place of mourning alone. It had become a place of truth, of quiet acceptance, and of hope daring to take root. Mara lifted her face, meeting Cole's gaze fully. There was no fear in her eyes now, only clarity. "I'm not running anymore," she said softly. "Not from them, not from my past, not from myself." Cole cupped her cheek gently. "You don't have to run. Not here." She reached for his hand, weaving her fingers through his. And for the first time in her life, she felt whole, completely, undeniably whole. Morning broke slow and golden over the valley, casting long fingers of light across the meadow that rolled out from Cole Hardman's ranch like a quiet sea. Dew shimmered on the grass. The sky warmed from lavender to rose. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, Mara woke without fear pressing its cold hand over her ribs. She lay in the small bed near the window, wrapped in one of the quilts Cole's late wife had stitched years ago, a quilt he kept not out of grief, but out of respect. The fabric was cool against her cheek and smelled faintly of juniper and wood smoke. She blinked into the stillness, listening to the soft rattle of the wind against the eaves and the distant, slow shuffle of horses in the corral. Peace, she realized, was a sound. And she was finally learning to hear it. Mara slipped out of bed, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and stepped outside. The breeze was gentle. The world was tender with early light. She breathed it in, letting it settle into the places where pain used to live. This land, the open horizon, the red earth, the towering cottonwoods, had become a balm she never expected, a sanctuary she'd once believed she didn't deserve. Behind her, she heard the creak of the cabin door. Cole stepped out, adjusting the collar of his shirt, his hair still damp from washing. There were lines around his eyes from years of working beneath the sun, and something soft in the way he looked at her now, something that held a careful hope. "You're up early," he said with a half-smile. "So are you," she replied. He moved beside her, not too close, just near enough that she felt his presence. A comforting warmth in the cool morning. "You slept?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, for the first time in a long while." "That's good," he said quietly. "You deserve rest." They stood in silence for several breaths, watching sunlight spill down the far ridgeline. A hawk circled overhead, its cries sharp and proud. The world was alive, but calm, like it was holding its breath for something. Mara turned to him. "Cole, may I ask you something?" His gaze shifted to hers. "Anything." She took a long breath, bracing herself. "If I stay here, truly stay, will it be because you want me to? Or because you feel obligated to protect me?" The question hung in the air like a suspended thread. Cole reached up, rubbing the back of his neck as though searching for the right words. "Mara, I don't do things out of obligation. Not when it comes to people. Not anymore." He paused. "When I protected you, I did it because it was right. When I offered my home, I did it because I wanted you safe. But wanting you here, that's different." Her heartbeat quickened. "Different how?" He looked at her fully then, deep, steady, unguarded. "Because I care about you. Not just as someone who's been hurt. Not as someone who needs shelter. But as someone I want in my life. Someone who brings light back into these walls. Someone who's given me hope again." Mara felt her breath leave her in a slow, stunned exhale. She had heard many words spoken to her in her life, commands, bargains, lies, threats, but never words like these. Words that didn't claim her, but honored her. "Cole," she whispered, her voice barely a sound. He didn't touch her, he didn't step closer, he simply waited, giving her the room she deserved, the choice she had never been allowed before. For a long moment, all she could do was stare at him, the man who had bought her not for ownership, but for her freedom. The man who carried grief and gentleness in equal measure. The man who spoke to her like she was someone with worth. Someone with a future. Slowly, she turned her gaze toward the meadow again. She watched the wind shift through the tall grass, the sunlight chasing shadows like playful children. Somewhere deep inside, something long buried trembled awake, a longing she had never dared acknowledge. A longing for belonging. A longing for choice. A longing for him. She finally met his eyes. "Then I choose this," she said softly. "I choose you. I choose this land. I choose a life where I'm not running anymore." Cole's breath caught. His expression shifted, as though the ground had moved beneath him. "Mara, are you sure?" "Yes." Her voice steadied. "Because staying isn't about safety now. It's about happiness. And I never thought I'd get to say that." He took a careful step forward. When she didn't draw back, he reached out, slowly, giving her every chance to refuse, and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers trembled just slightly, and something inside her warmed at the vulnerability of it. "You make this place feel alive again," he murmured. "And you make me feel human again," she replied. They stood there for a long moment, suspended in the stillness of morning, the world holding them gently as though afraid to break the fragile, beautiful truth blooming between them. Then, softly, Cole asked, "Will you help me run this ranch? Not as someone I protect, but as someone I build a life with?" The question hit her like sunlight hitting frozen earth, sudden, warming, transforming. She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "Yes, I want to build something with you. Something real." Cole didn't embrace her at first. Instead, he stepped back a little, giving her the dignity of choice even now. When she reached for him, her hands steady, her decision firm, he gathered her into his arms and held her as though she was something precious. Not fragile, precious. She felt the rise and fall of his breath, the warmth of his chest, the quiet strength in his embrace. For the first time in her life, being held didn't feel like possession. It felt like home. The sun rose higher, spilling gold over the valley, painting them in soft, forgiving light. The horses nickered, the cottonwoods swayed, and the ranch, once silent with sorrow, filled slowly with the quiet, healing hum of two lives beginning again. When they finally pulled apart, Cole brushed a thumb gently across her cheek. "Welcome home, Mara." She smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. "Yes," she said softly, "home." And as the morning warmed into day, the past finally loosened its grip, drifting away like dust on the wind. Ahead lay fields to tend, fences to mend, seasons to share, and a life built not from fear or survival, but from choice. From hope. From love rising slow and steady, just like the dawn.